Danny, nice to speak to you face to face for the first time.
Likewise, man. First of all, I wanted to tell you, man, I've known about the Health Optimization Summit since last year because one of my best friends actually spoke at it, and he was I remember when he was preparing for it, Ben Bukolski.
Oh yeah, Ben. Yeah.
Cool. So and now it'll come full circle, hopefully in January when I'm over there with you guys.
Oh, awesome, awesome. I didn't realize you knew Ben.
Yeah, he's also my business partner. We got a business together.
Oh right, I see. He's a busy boy, that Ben.
Oh my goodness, yes he is.
Yeah, he gave a good talk actually. We had really good feedback from it.
Awesome.
Yeah, I haven't connected with him lately actually. I should drop him a line. So Danny, obviously you're representing Pruvit today. You're a firm supporter of them, and as all the listeners know, I like to interview or have a video with all of the exhibitors just to talk about why we wanted Pruvit at the summit. And because obviously the brands that do exhibit are 95% invited, i.e. we reach out to them and ask, and about 5% they reach out to us. And I'm pretty strict with who I let on the exhibition floor because I've got my name to it, obviously. And that just means that everyone can trust it's a curated experience. And obviously Pruvit are the exogenous keto brand. There's two that I like. Pruvit is the main one. And so I was really happy to have you guys on board. So I guess if I explain what Pruvit is from my side of things, and then if you want to go into it after that, that'd be good.
Yeah.
The first time I used exogenous ketones was when, which with another brand actually, which wasn't so good, but I was with my friend Tony Wrighton that runs the Zestology podcast. And it was the first time we used exogenous ketones. We'd been on a keto diet, and then I nearly said a line of exogenous ketones. I did this once before. We did some ketones and we were buzzing. It was almost like we'd done a line of something illegal because our energy was just absolutely awesome. And it was just like, Tony was like, do you feel like almost high? And I was like, yeah, I do, man. This is brilliant. So that's when I started using them originally. So I think from when you're intermittent fasting or starting into ketosis and you're having the low carb limbo, or you're not hydrating properly, or various other things, adding in exogenous ketones is really good because it really does give you a spike. And so for my personal experience, I like to add it in every now and then and not rely on it. Whereas one point I was having it all day, every day, and living off of the stuff, which obviously isn't, that's around the early days of keto, I guess, like 3 years ago, three and a half years ago, earlier days. Yeah, I mean, I think from my side, I'd love to hear how you think Pruvit and exogenous ketones really helps to optimize health and the key benefits of it, if that's okay, mate.
Yeah, first I just want to give because I want to share my first experience. When I started in 2016, I was bombarded with marketing from exogenous ketone companies. You know how smart Google is. And I was like, okay, this is cool. And I also started with another brand. And I remember that I was about 3 or 4 months in and feeling amazing. And then I was taking them consistently like you were. And we went on a big hike in northern Georgia, and it was just like almost spiritual. Like I felt like the clarity, my calmness, of course, as time went on, I was seeing, okay, what does this do with GABA? What does this do with glutamate? And that's probably part of the reason why I felt more relaxed. I felt less anxious. And one of the reasons why, kids with ADHD and these hyperactive disorders, they may be doing well as well. But what is Pruvit? First of all, I'll tell you, like the first year and a half, I was just like, I was not a fan of Pruvit because I just felt like, the people that were reaching out to me, by 2 months in, I had already read several books and 41 published papers. And these people were telling me that they can get me into ketosis. And I was like, what the heck, But then I started over the years to realize that, number one, my friends that right down the street, really good friends of mine, Ryan Lowry and Jacob Wilson, they were doing all this research. And, I did have that problem with the marketing, and it bothered me for years. But then I realized that these people are supporting a lot of the research that we see that's adding more information to this conversation, this ketosis conversation, and even the performance side, which is where I've always kind of focused on as much, like especially with the the ketogenic athlete. We focus on all the athletic benefits. So between the support that they gave to the ketogenic community and the fact that the formulation is unique, it's definitely something that we'll talk about today. That's why finally, not that long ago, I started to take exogenous ketones, and I took them from Pruvit, and I noticed there was a definite difference, again, because of the formulation. But I can talk about, what it is if you're interested in me going into that detail a little bit.
Well, before we do, I've just realized that I would love you to tell the guys a little bit about you and then how this fits together, because then that would give them a bit more background as to why you can talk in much more detail and better about it than I can. So I'd love to hear a bit about your history, actually, mate.
Yeah, that's a great idea. So, I was born and raised in Miami, Florida. I received my bachelor's degree from Columbia University. They recruited me for football. I didn't even know who Columbia was and where they were. I was just this little Cuban kid from Miami that just happened to be really good at football. And so I ended up going there, and then I knew that I wanted to be a strength and conditioning coach. So I continued on to University of Florida and got my master's in human performance there. It was one of the first 2 non-research based grad school programs that was practical. We were looking at program design and all that stuff. And I worked with football the first 8 months, and then they moved me to the basketball facility where I assisted with basketball. And then I was designing programs for men's and women's golf and men's and women's tennis. And that led to my first career, which was I was a collegiate strength and conditioning coach. I was the head strength coach for VCU basketball. We broke every record in school history, conference history. We beat Duke in the tournament, which hadn't been done since like 84, 85. And of course, they published, we had some unique methods that I brought over from University of Florida, and we changed, their whole style of play, and we had a lot of success. After a few years of that, just not making any money, I decided to go chase money. And I'm going to just forgive me for this. I've been repenting for this for a long time. I worked in pharma for 3.5 years. And then I moved on to medical device. Yeah. And the end of it was the worst, because I was in medical device for about 10 years. And then in 2016, I had kind of like left this whole strength and conditioning nutrition space. And when I started the ketogenic diet in 2016 in June, it just reignited my passion for all of this. And two months into it, I found myself co-hosting a show called The Ketogenic Athlete, where for 3 years or so, we interviewed all types of professional athletes, everyone from fighters to football players to even like arm wrestlers, through hikers, everything that you can think of. We were, of course, endurance athletes. And then from there, let's see what else. I was also a power lifter, so that was one of the things that I was always competitive. And in 2013, I started powerlifting, and by a few years, I had already hit the top 25 in the US in my weight class with 700 deadlift, 400 bench, and 610 squat in sleeves. I also, that was fun, but then it tore my body apart. And then I started competing, believe it or not, in indoor rowing. And I had 3 Florida records. I'd have to check if I still have them, but I was competing in the 100 meter, the 500 meter, and the minute for distance. And those were the ones that I had those records. Also was like top 10 in the country. And, ever since then, like I said, I've been mostly focused on the performance side, but also our Fat Fueled Family podcast that we started in 2018 is focused on, our 5 pillars are nutrition, fitness, peaceful parenting, which sounds kind of weird to include with that, education, because we're unschoolers, and mindset. And we just share how all of those things fit together to give us the results that we have, because you can't just focus on nutrition. You can't just focus on fitness. And here we are today.
Amazing. So your podcast is called the Fat for Fuel, did you say?
Fat Fueled Family.
Yep. Fat Fueled Family. Yeah. Okay, cool. Awesome. So, I'll check that out afterwards. I'm not sure why I haven't heard. Obviously, I know you from Instagram, and your name pops up everywhere. I didn't realize the connection with Ben, and I didn't realize about the podcast. So that's awesome to know. So awesome. Okay, dude. So So let's jump onto the I guess the next to the question then. How do you feel that Pruvit fits into optimizing health specifically?
Well, first, Keto OS, that's what the main, product for Pruvit is, and it stands for ketone operating system. It's an exogenous ketone supplement that provides like an immediate source of ketones that can put you in ketosis in probably right around 60 minutes, and it provides BHB. There's different types of exogenous ketones. We have the salts, which are usually bound to something like sodium or potassium or calcium or a combination, which is the goal with that is to increase the uptake. Now, then you have esters, which is just pure beta hydroxybutyrate. It's used a lot in research. It tastes like rocket fuel. I got to tell you, me personally, have you ever taken the esters?
Yeah. Yeah.
Man, I don't know about the performance side with esters, but I will tell you from a mental performance side, it gives me like a really, really strong effect, and then it drops off quickly. But, some of these Pruvit supplements also have things like MCT powder and caffeine, which both have been demonstrated in several studies to improve performance. Dom D'Agostino is another friend of ours who lives in Tampa, who was one of the people who basically said, you add some MCT powder to your ketones. Not only does it kind of, it's what's the word that I'm looking for? I guess it shuttles the ketones in. It kind of like gives you a more, a longer effect is what it does. And then the caffeine is another great thing. And then of course, a lot of people experience the benefits, especially in the beginning, because of all the sodium. And we know like in the first 28 days, the research shows sodium and potassium are very affected, because when your insulin drops, your electrolytes drops. And so this would help through that keto flu. The other thing is technically these products really help us reach a state of ketosis, and that's a good thing, because, some people are just starting, and if they've experienced what being in ketosis feels like, not only does it help with compliance, but it also helps them get over that initial hump. Or if they're coming off like, they had a tough weekend where they kind of fell off the wagon and didn't do well, that would probably help. Again, also with the sodium. And it gives you the benefits of ketosis without fasting or without eating a low carbohydrate diet. But in my opinion, honestly, the best way to do it is being on a low carb diet. I will say, like with the applications to things like the military, these people are not exactly eating a ketogenic diet. Sometimes they're in an austere environment. They're eating MREs, which are like, ton of carbs. And, Dom's research has shown how important that is for preventing or prolonging the onset of oxygen toxicity seizures when they're using those oxygen rebreathers. And then if I had to break it down as far as like the main things that it would help, it could improve athletic performance. It could reduce your appetite, which is another great one, because some people, I know one of our friends who's out in Spain, oh my gosh, I'm forgetting his name, but he asked the other day about like, what if someone says, I'd rather intermittent fast and just eat 2 meals a day than take ketones. But one thing that those people aren't realizing is that those ketones can help you by blunting your appetite, and then overall, because the energy equation is still so important, you're eating less calories by consuming ketones.
Well, I mean, I just like to jump in quickly. I mean, I'm a massive fan of Dom, actually. I got to meet him a couple years ago at the Hyperbaric Oxygen Conference over in Denver. So I opened a clinic in hyperbaric oxygen therapy in London a few years ago, and got into that space and didn't even know Dom was going to be there. And obviously I was a fanboy. This is before I got to know anyone really in the industry personally. So I was a bit starstruck when I met him. I was like a fanboy. I was almost shaking. But obviously I listened to him on Joe Rogan and with Dave Asprey and all these guys as well. And really had listened to his work a lot around the time for keto for me, because I'd had systemic I guess, candida in the gut from so much antibiotics for so long, and I couldn't get my arabinose levels down or the yeast levels down, and I couldn't optimize my gut bacteria as a result. So I was using hyperbaric oxygen therapy to obviously oxygenate myself and help with my energy, which is why I'd opened a clinic, because I just said, sod it, I want one, and I want to have access to it. But after hearing Dom's work around ketosis and hyperbaric oxygen therapy, it got me hooked even more so. And yeah, it's really amazing how the body deals with oxygen differently, isn't it, when you're in ketosis? And I think just to go back to what you mentioned about his work with the oxygen rebreathers, they were looking at the Navy SEALs with oxygen rebreathers, so that the Navy SEALs wouldn't have bubbles coming up when they're diving and therefore not be shot, because people can see where the bubbles come from. And he realized that children were having epileptic fits that go into, excuse me, a ketogenic diet. They don't have their seizures. And the thing is, with the Navy SEALs, they were having seizures after a few minutes of having 100% oxygen at such pressures. So he realized, he paired them together and went, well, actually, if they're in ketosis, they can actually, I think it's 300% longer with 300% longer before having a seizure at 100% oxygen. So the body deals with oxygen completely differently. So that's one of the things that really struck me with about ketosis, is how different the body is dealing with oxygen, and which is why the brain comes online, I think, as well, and why the energy picks up. And it is the better energy state, but I don't think it's sustainable all day, every day. I mean, I think that's now classed as dirty keto when you're eating filthy fats. And I mean, it's fun for a while, but then it stresses the liver, and I think when you combine having some carbs and not too low, not too high, as well as a healthy fat diet with the right phospholipids to help with the whole fat side of things, and the butyrate to help with the gut, like for instance, from my favorite is sodium butyrate from Body Bio, actually. And also adding in liver bile, ox bile, helps me digest fats better, helps me be in ketosis more naturally, and then using something like Pruvit actually then helps you spike it and stops you getting the low carb limbo. And I think the final thing before I shut up and let you speak again is I think from my experience of it is that obviously the word carbohydrate, the second part of it is hydrate, because it's mineral rich. So when people go into ketosis and they go, oh, I feel crap, I've got headaches, I've got no energy, and this ketosis thing is supposed to be amazing. Well, in fact, it is amazing, but the thing is you're deficient in minerals, and which is why using Himalayan rock salt or something or other in a glass of water in the morning, like a plastic teaspoon full of Himalayan rock salt, will give you the minerals that you would have got from your food, and therefore your energy doesn't crash. So when you're having something like Pruvit or any of the other brands for exogenous ketones, if they're good ones, they actually are, as you say, bonded to the right salts, which will give you those minerals that you need so that you don't crash, and it fixes the low carb limbo. So it's like I completely agree from another angle of again, from my study, not so professional, just a usual biohacker, I guess. Of how it fits together, which is why I think it's such a good idea to always carry around a packet of exogenous ketones wherever you go, which is what I got. Yeah.
Well, one of the things that you brought up that really made me think was something that Dom told me 3 years ago that stuck with me, that I'm just like, and now that my understanding is so much deeper, I'm just like, that makes so much sense. And he said, I think a low carb diet with intermittent fasting is probably more ketogenic than a ketogenic diet. And so you can have these more carbs, but you incorporate that intermittent fasting. And then on top of that, you get the benefits of, like, if you're having soluble fiber, that helps produce butyrate, which goes into the cycle and helps produce more ketones. And it's interesting. Some people don't know that. They're like, well, why are you having, 50 carbs? But if you're having like 30 grams of those in the form of fiber, 25 grams in the form of fiber, you may have better ketone production than someone who's not. And the other thing that you mentioned that I totally agree with, especially because, like you, I geek out on, my genetics and even like, food sensitivity stuff. I know I have a lot of good information on the way my body works. And in the summers, I remember when I started eating a carnivore diet, like in 2017, in the summers, it was brutal because I'm more prone to some of my SNPs, some of my mutations, make me a little bit more prone to cramping. And so like I started adding, more carbohydrate in the summers, and that really, really helped. But like you said, when you're supplementing with an exogenous ketones that's providing that, or you're actively supplementing with salt. I also have this Dr. D. Nicolantonio, James D. Nicolantonio.
Yeah.
Yeah, he just came out with this Magtine, which is a great magnesium formulation, and he even sent me all the research, and I'm very diligent with that, as well as, potassium was one that I was kind of poo-pooing back in the day. I was like, I don't need that. But then I started to research. Actually, did you write it might have been you who wrote this PDF that I really loved on like sleep and stuff. And one of the things, I don't know if it was you, but it might have been, but I remember reading this PDF a while back, how potassium, how it can help your sleep is that it works synergistically with these other electrolytes to prevent nighttime muscle spasms. And I have this little theory, just personally, that, if I'm low electrolyte, and let's say I have to wake up in the middle of the night to urinate, my theory is that it's probably not the urination, like the urge to urinate, that's waking me up. It's probably these muscle spasms that are waking me up. And oh, by the way, yeah, I got to urinate. So it's really important to keep those electrolytes.
Well, I'd love to jump in on that, because one of the things from my history is frequent urination. So, and I'll explain why this is relevant. So when I've always had urination problems a little bit, but nothing major. And then after my antibiotics that ruined my gut, stopped me digesting food and stuff, I suddenly had frequent urination. I was going, and then this is no exaggeration, 30 to 50 times a day. And which would then cause prostate issues and dehydration and energy issues, and I'd be crashing and stuff like that. No one said to me it could be your salt or your minerals level, even though, if you're hydrated correctly, you actually hold on to your fluids better if you have the right minerals. So no one actually told me this, and I was figuring it out, and I added in some salt one day and I peed like 5 times as much. I just literally, as soon as I drink a cup, it seemed to come out again. And I remember this, it was the biggest stressor of my life, having to run to the toilet every 5 minutes. It was insane. And so I decided to try the different minerals and add one in one by one. And it's really interesting because I tried several of them, and then I got to potassium. And I found that at the Goldilocks dose of 200 milligrams of potassium a day meant that I retained my water, and I stopped waking up to pee in the middle of the night. I haven't peed. I think I've peed probably in the night once since then, from peeing 3 to 5 times during the night as well.
Oof, that's tough.
Yeah, it was brutal. So not only did I retain my water better, it helped my energy and all these other things. Now, over a period of time, I can taper that down, but whatever I do, I always need my potassium. If I go a week without having potassium in, even if I'm low carb or normal, I start peeing more frequently again. So it's really interesting how it helps you retain water. Some people find that salt doesn't do anything for them. Other people do, but the key indicator, especially when you're in ketosis, is if you get the sock marks, like when the stretchy band around your socks, if it leaves an indent in your skin and it leaves socks marks, and I wonder how many people are looking down at their legs right now, then that's an indication that you're deficient in potassium specifically. It's it's a really, really good indicator. And also, if you're having frequent urination, try adding potassium in. And then once you've got used to that and you sorted your frequent urination out, if you have it, and most people do because they're drinking gallons of water every day in mineral deficient water, if you add the right minerals in and half a teaspoonful of mineral salt, rock salt in the morning, and in the evening, you'll find that your hydration balances out. You can drink half as much water and you'll do 10 times better on the ketogenic diet as well. So I mean, I spent 10 years hacking that one, so I could talk all day about
found it. For me, it's really like more dependent on my activity levels. But for years I was looking at this relationship between sodium and potassium, and I found, for me personally, if I'm right around 2 to 1 with my which is a little bit more aggressive than what you said as far as the potassium, because like if I really like this Redmond product that they got, the Relight. They have a Relight powder now. They also have the Relight capsules, which is like you take 2, it's like 560 milligrams of sodium. But the drink is really cool because it's a gram of sodium with 500 milligrams of potassium. But the one that you mentioned, the 200, there's also the Rob Wolf and and Lewis's product, which is a gram of sodium with 200 milligrams of potassium.
Yeah. Again, yeah, great. I love Robert. I love Redmond salt as well. I actually carry one of the tiny little shakers around with me everywhere.
We always do. If we forget it when we go to like the Brazilian steakhouse, we're like tearing our hair out.
I know. I literally take it everywhere. I gave one to Dominic last week, the other day as well. Like their prized little possessions. I got a whole load of them when I was at Paleo FX last year, and Sean Wells gave me one as well when I stayed.
I love Sean. That's my buddy.
He's a good friend.
Always got mine. I always got them in a backpack, some in the car, and then if we don't have it, we're like, we have to consume this peasant salt now.
Yeah, I love this stuff. It's funny because I brought some salt the other week, and it had a sell-by date on it. It's like it was actually rock salt that had been from the Himalayas, obviously. So it's like
probably 1,000 years old,
millions of years old, and it's like sell-by date, February 2022. I was just like, this is just so bad.
Commercial.
But, yeah, it is. So I mean, like in terms of health benefits, the people that have obviously listened to the mineral balance side of things shows you why a lot of people don't stick with keto, because they just don't get the hydration side of things down properly. And I think that the biggest reason for people dropping off of keto is because they lose energy and don't necessarily know what they're doing properly, which is why it's always good to work with a practitioner where you can, or study it properly before just diving in and doing it. But I think with having something like Pruvit as an exogenous ketone, when you are dipping, I think having some Redmond salt or whatever nearby and having some exogenous ketones really does pick you up. But my opinion is you shouldn't rely on it, and it shouldn't be a staple. It is a supplement that you supplement with when you need it, not just an everyday replacement of a food. So I mean, what are your other experiences with exogenous ketones then?
Yeah, well, I would say like from the performance side, we can start with that. One of the other reasons beyond the mineral equation is the way it spares glucose and it spares glycogen. And so, a lot of the time people, they hit that wall, especially when they're just starting a ketogenic diet. You're removing a whole macronutrient that your body's very used to breaking down and absorbing and using quickly and metabolizing quickly, because of how easy it is to use glucose. But then, when you get fat adapted, we know from things like the FASTER study that when you're fat adapted, it will spare glycogen and you'll be able to replete glycogen. You'll be able to replace it just as quickly. But there's that lag time in those first couple of months where you provide an immediate source of ketones, and it really helps. It spares glycogen. There's that one study where they had 39 high performance athletes and they drank. We'll stick with kilograms out of consideration to you, but it was basically 200 or actually, let me see, it's 58 for me. It's 573 milligrams per kilogram. So for me, that breaks down to about 58 grams of esters in this one study, where these athletes traveled 400 meters further in a 30-minute test. And then it also can help recovery by sparing glycogen. It's not really applicable to exercises that require like a burst of energy, because those are anaerobic and we need aerobic metabolism to break down the ketones. So we're going to talk about like things that you're never just using one energy system, unless it's like creatine phosphate, unless it's that, really quick. But then once you get into like what a lot of us are doing, it's a mix of glycolytic with aerobic, and those will all benefit from exogenous ketones. The other thing is it can reduce your appetite by impacting the hypothalamus, that's one of the things that the hypothalamus is in charge of. It regulates food intake, it regulates energy balance. And then there was that one study where, I mean, I think it's unfair to compare it to a carbohydrate drink, but they saw that the people that were taking exogenous ketones, and I think in this one, they were actually consuming, this was just exogenous ketones. They had a significantly lower appetite compared to the carb drink. And the other one that's huge that we have to talk about, because I'm sure just like me, you're obsessed probably with the nootropics and just brain performance. That's like, if anybody, like Sean was asking the other day, what type of content should I put out? And I was like, look, anything having to deal with nootropics, and especially like any potential synergies between nootropics are really, you know, desirable to me. But like when you look at how exogenous ketones can help people with Alzheimer's and cognitive, mild cognitive impairment, that is mainly due to the fact that, you know, a lot of these people are insulin resistant, and you know that, you know how they call Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes, it's insulin resistance of the brain. And it's like the glucose is getting up there, but it's not being used. And there's this energy crisis that the brain actually prefers ketone. It can't use fat as energy, but it does really well with ketones. So they've had multiple studies in Alzheimer's, and it's a major factor in slowing the progression of Alzheimer's. And then the other thing that, well, there's one study, they had 20 adults with Alzheimer's or mild cognitive impairment. It increased the blood levels of BHB. This was with MCT oil, but it, you know, with ketones, it would also be even more of a direct benefit, because if you were to look at one of the things that Sean told me once is like, coconut oil is very helpful because of the MCTs, but then when you go to MCT oil, it's about 3 times as powerful. And then when you go to C8, it's about 3 times as powerful. And then if you go to a really good exogenous ketone supplement, it's even better than that. And on top of that, I did want to mention, just if you have someone in your family that has mild cognitive impairment, ketones, exogenous ketones would definitely be something that I would have on board. But then I would also look at also increasing things like NGF and BDNF, which just help with neurogenesis. So adding in some lion's mane. I have a whole list of compounds that can increase BDNF and NGF. And some of them are interesting, like even CBD has a little correlation there.
I just want to stop you there just quickly before we go on. I just want to head back to something. So one point I just want to cover is obviously ketosis in evolution and why it works so well. Because I think for a lot of people that are listening, they're like, ketosis, they've heard about it, they don't necessarily understand it fully. And I think we're breaking it down quite well of where we are so far. But I think for me, how I feel ketosis fits into the world is that from an evolutionary perspective, as a caveman, we would have our family, they would be in a cave and live in a cave or whatever. And the man would get up in the morning and run off and kill animals, and pick some food, bring it back to the cave. He would eat on the fly, probably while doing high intensity exercise, chasing an animal, jumping around like a crazy man, lifting stuff, building stuff. And the wife would be at home nurturing the kids and feeding the kids with the store of food that they have in the cooler cave, but it's not cold. So therefore the food would slightly ferment over the couple of days before it was eaten. It would be eaten with campfire. When that campfire was on, that would be the only light that they have. Therefore their sleep cycles would be better. They would intermittent fast because they couldn't eat after sunset, and that would typically be 6 or 7 p.m. depending on the time of year. And then they wouldn't eat again until the man had caught more food the next day at probably 10 in the morning. And so in that time, you've got an intermittent fasting window of automatically of 12, 14, 16 hours. You've got fermented food, which helps feed the gut. You've got high intensity training, and all these things that are really keeping us into ketosis. And some people are more naturally fat adapted because of their genes and their gut bacteria and all these things. So really biohacking and ketosis and things like that is an evolutional, from an evolutionary perspective, a diet, a true diet. But it doesn't mean that we would always be in ketosis. Sometimes we would eat heavy carbs. We'd probably not eat for 2 or 3 days while we didn't have any meat, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's really how the whole ketosis piece fits into evolution and why we're here. And some people do horrendously on it, such as females, for instance. They can intermittent fast to some extent, but their hormones get all screwed up when they go on ketosis for too long and don't do it right. But it can be done right. The thing is, their fasting window can be a lot smaller because they would be in the cave with food stores. They wouldn't necessarily do so much exercise on it and stress their adrenals, whereas the guys had higher testosterone and could do that. So I really feel like this whole piece comes together. And I think where biohacking is, it's using technology to mimic a natural environment in an unnatural world, which I always say, well, Pruvit or exogenous ketones are technology. They're a future advanced thing. It is today's equivalent of fire for a caveman, who is the guy that got to eat better as a result. And I think using this technology, we can say, well, actually we can fast, we can exercise, we can do these diets because now we understand them better, and we can add in things like exogenous ketones, which really helps us turbocharge things, just like fire did once with cooking food. So that's the first point I wanted everyone to understand, is how I really see it. The other point was that you said about type 3 diabetes, obviously with Alzheimer's. Now, have you got any experience with, I can never say it, pyruvate? So pyruvate was a new, is something that I was put onto about a month ago, actually, and it helps with basically utilization of carbohydrates. So if you're low in pyruvate, and that's something that comes from the gut, I'm not overly familiar with it, but I've been testing it. And when I added it in, and I think it's because I wasn't having enough carbs, it was like rocket fuel. My brain came alive within an hour of having this pyruvate, and it's obviously bonded to several minerals as well. I think it's potassium, sodium, and magnesium pyruvate, which is really good. So I would be interested to know if you know anything about it. If not, no worries. But
I honestly, I haven't experimented with it, but now you got me all like curious. I do know that pyruvates, it's very important in the cascade that happens with, metabolism, especially with ketosis. But I don't have any personal, experience with it. I just wanted to add, my wife is one of those women who, she eats mostly a carnivore diet because of how it helps her feel. Ketosis helped her with depression, but then carnivore really helped her with the anxiety. The problem is that her cycle was shortened to 25 days. So what she does is she also does terribly with longer fasts, but about 2 days after ovulation, and then like the first 1 or 2 days of her cycle, she adds in some carbs. And it really immediately, like the first month that she did that, it brought her back up to 28 days. And then there was one more thing that you mentioned that I thought it was, I just love the way you broke down, ancestral living and just thinking about the sleep. Like, think about the fact that when the light bulb came out, we lost like about an hour and a half of sleep a night. And that's the light bulb. Think about all these blue lights that we have now. It's a disaster for the way it disrupts our circadian biology, which is all part of that equation that you were talking about, that amazing lifestyle of the ancients that, yeah, they didn't have medicine, but man, they were not grinding every day, on computers and all that. And even like energy usage, which is interesting. I remember not too long ago, there was a podcast that I heard, I don't remember who, it might've been Ben Greenfield, who had a guy on who was talking about how our metabolism, the amount of calories that we burn per day now are roughly equal to what we used to back in the day. But it's only because of the fact that our brains are processing so much more information, and there's an energy need there, but we don't get the benefits that we did back then, because back then that energy was being used just from moving around all day. And we don't get those movement benefits, which I think is very important, that if someone's training for an hour and a half a day and sitting down the rest of the day, it's not going to be enough.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's awesome. So guys, I just want to jump into the listeners that are live now, and obviously we're recording this as well, so it'll be shared out later on. But if you've got any questions, well, actually there's 2 prizes to give away for the 2 best questions today. So keep them rolling in and we will come to answer them. And I think it's probably a good time for us to answer them now, actually.
Sure.
I mean, I think with the potassium supplement to help with edema, and I can never say that right for some reason, I'm a firm believer from my own personal experience that it's good, and it's definitely worth trying. So yeah, I've just Googled it while we're on here as well, just to confirm before I go off and say something that's incorrect. But it says here, potassium, and this is from a good source, potassium can be useful in counterbalancing the effects of sodium has on the body. When you consume more potassium, sodium is excreted through the urine. Potassium therefore can be useful in reducing water retention caused by excessive sodium intake. I completely agree with that. And while I'm not a practitioner or anything like that, I'm just saying I'm a researcher and have tested things on myself. And I know that with the sock marks in my legs, it was really bad at one point. They are now non-existent, and I'm not going to show you my feet right now. So that was a really good question. I don't know if you've got anything to add on that.
The only thing I'll add with potassium is that it's so fantastic. You just gotta, it's not like with sodium, the upper limits are much higher. And with potassium, you got to just be careful not to just say more is better, because there is the potential risk of things like hyperkalemia, which will increase the likelihood of you getting a heart attack. I mean, I think with I think it's potassium chloride that they inject people with here to stop their hearts when they do lethal injections, which is a whole other subject. But
yeah, you got to go careful on it. I mean, in England, we actually have a 99 milligram limit for potassium in a supplement, because it's
in pills. I think we have that as well. I think in pills, but somehow when you put it in an electrolyte supplement, I think they're able to get around that somehow.
It is, yeah. I mean, with potassium glycinate, for instance, that's it's like 1/6 potassium, 5/6 glycinic acid. So therefore, the dose is much lower. And that's how I get my 200 milligrams in one go. So yeah, that's a really great question. I really like that one. Let's just see if there's any other questions that have come in just quickly. 1 second. When is the best time to take exogenous ketones? Will they still have a good effect if I'm already in ketosis, or better to take with carb source to avoid the negative effects the carbs might have? Negative is in terms of bringing you out of ketosis, but not necessarily negative. But yeah, what do you think?
One of the things that's awesome about being in ketosis is that there's an inverse relationship between your ketone levels, or even like your ketone levels and blood sugar, or your insulin and blood sugar. So when insulin's high, blood sugar, when insulin's high, blood sugar's high. Usually it's because of insulin's high because of blood sugar. But usually, unless you're a type 1 diabetic, if your ketones are high, your insulin's going to be low and your blood sugar will be lowered. I would say that, having exogenous ketones with a meal, I'm not aware of, I haven't looked at any research that does that. But in that case, one of the things that I would recommend is just something so simple as berberine. You take some berberine before a meal. Like yesterday, I had a higher carb day where I ate like 200 and something grams of carbs. I do that twice a week. And on those days, I put them to work. I train twice, shorter sessions. But taking exogenous ketones maybe the day after, especially if you wake up and you find that your fasted glucose is elevated, it'll just kind of get you back in much quicker. What ends up happening when you take an exogenous ketones, if I remember this correctly, is like you get this quick increase, and then over time you go back down under baseline. But then if you wait a little bit longer, you'll see that your ketones over time will get back above baseline. The other thing that I found very, very interesting my first year, when I was a ketone producing machine, but I wasn't exactly utilizing those ketones. I remember my blood levels got sometimes, because I was, I'm a pretty big guy and I was eating, upwards of 350, sometimes 400 grams of fat, was that I would do the blood meter. And there were twice where I got high. I was like, what the hell is high? I don't even know what that is. And I was looking and it was 8. It was high. It was above 8. And, someone who doesn't know about this is like, more is better. This is great. But I can guarantee you that if there wasn't a metabolic need for those ketones, they probably were peed out, And so, what I do think is that if you, for example, you have to look at MCT transporters. Those are super important. If you're not someone who's active and you don't have a lot of MCT transporters, you can start exercising more, and that would help. But I remember the first year asking Ryan and Jacob, I said, man, I think that supplementing with these exogenous ketones is helping me increase like my overall baseline of ketosis and my blood levels of ketones. And I said, do you think that would have anything to do with my MCT transporters? And they said, well, it stands to reason that if you have, if you're continually in a deep level of ketosis, over a while, like think about MCT transporters as like a lane on a highway. And if you only have like 1 or 2 lanes, you're only going to be able to use so much. But if your body sees that there's elevated ketones for a longer period of time, it would probably increase those ketone transporters. So now you got more lanes and you can use more of it efficiently. I haven't seen anything in the research, but it was kind of like a speculation mixed with just personal experience that I thought. So I think we answered that, right? Like,
yeah, we did. One thing I'd like to just jump in on is when I went to Dom's event, Metabolic Health Summit last January. Was it last January? Yeah, last January, in Long Beach. It was awesome, actually, but there were so many keto products. There's so many keto cookies. There's exogenous ketones. And it's like, it wasn't a summit in terms of exhibitor wise, in terms of health. It was more about ketosis. And my approach is always health first, always.
Absolutely, totally agree with that.
And while I have no bad feeling about it at all, I just think it really did help shape me to shape the strategy that we have for Health Optimization Summit, that says we're not just going to have a form of keto cookie and all these different products. Now, I understand summits and conferences are so hard to put on. They cost so much money. Like, it's a very, very stressful thing, and it's a big financial machine, unfortunately, that doesn't really make any money. And so it's a big risk. You don't know how many tickets are going to sell. People it's just a really interesting balance. So I understand that there's an economic thing to make the event happen, that you have to get certain brands in. But for me, it was one thing that made me shape the summit. And in fact, this year, they did change it significantly, which was great, but there's still an economic scale that I understand. So where I'm going with that is, one thing that they didn't have at the summit, which I was really disappointed about, was something like liver support, whether that was ox bile or digestive enzymes, or even hydrochloric stomach acid tablets, for instance, to support the whole digestive process. Now, the simplest way for me is to explain liver bile, which is obviously your liver gets stressed if it's always trying to digest fats when you're on a high fat diet all the time, or if you're taking too many supplements. Liver bile becomes short. And if you think of washing up liquid for your dishes, you put washing up liquid in some oil and you see it disperse. Well, that's what liver bile does in our digestive system. It breaks down the fats so that we can actually utilize the fats. And if you stress your liver too much, you end up not being able to digest the fats, and then just having loose stools for months and months and months, which is a major keto problem when people don't know what they're doing. So adding in ox bile nearly always loosens the digestive system to start with. It kills off loads of crap, but it helps you absorb the fats. And I find through testing that my ketone levels shot up, like after being keto for 3 months. And it was really good. I was at about 2.2, 2.3 pretty consistently, which was quite nice. And then after a while, it just trailed off, and I was at 0.2, 0.3. And I was like, I just can't understand it. But to talk graphically, as biohackers generally do, stools became looser and looser and lighter, knowing that my liver was being more and more stressed by trying to digest too much fats. I added ox bile in, and then it was amazing. And my ketone levels shot up very, very quickly. My digestive system picked up, and then I eased off of ketosis after about 10 or 11 months. And now I'm just metabolic flexible, because that was the learning for me. But it's just really interesting how not enough people talk about liver support and helping this do the process. And I think when you're adding in things like exogenous ketones, you do need to support your liver, not because of the product, just because of the nature of the amount of fats that you are eating. I don't know if you've had any experience with that or not, but that's
absolutely. Well, first, let me comment on the food. We came from a Weston A. Price paleo background, and the beauty of that is that it was focused on all quality. But then, just like happened with keto later on, you start to see an influx of paleo products with natural honey and natural agave, like in much higher quantities than you'd ever consume in nature. And then when you went to keto, then it was only focusing on the carb part of it. And ketosis is a metabolic state. You can have Diet Dr. Pepper and hot dogs and keto cookies all day and be in ketosis, but you feel like crap. These conferences, sometimes we take our boys, and our boys eat ketogenic, paleo, and they would come back. And even the people that went there, like, you don't even go in the bathroom, because you got this combination of like corn fiber, MCTs, and like 30 grams of erythritol, and these people are just farting all over the place. It's disgusting. So I totally agree with you there. And then on the bile thing, that's something that I totally agree with. And I think that timing is also important, based on like conversations I've had with a few people. I had a friend who lost his voice for 5 years, and he was a comedian. And imagine like not being able to talk, and no one knew what it was. And he started to figure out what was going on between his dysbiosis, his acid reflux. So taking HCl before a meal is great. And then what I would do based on what he told me, and you know, he's the one who did the research. So I just trusted him that this was a good idea, but he was like, just separate when you take the bile from your meals. So like maybe taking the bile before bed, and then you have that on board in the morning the next day to help you exactly with, because it is that balance of like, if you have the right amount of bile, your motility changes, and the you know, the shape, the texture. I don't even know about the texture, or whatever you want to call it. Better. I'm not out there feeling poop in the toilet, but yeah.
Okay, cool. So we need to wrap up in a minute, and I'm conscious that we've got 2 prizes to give away. I'd like to choose the potassium one for one of them. So Kirsten, I know you're listening in on that. Can you find out the potassium question usernames so that we can hook them up with the freebie giveaway? And I don't know if you want to pick one, if you can remember any question from the top of your head.
I really liked, because I hadn't thought about this, I really liked the question on you know, taking exogenous ketones with carb meals. It's a great question. You know, some people do take exogenous ketones with, you know, carbohydrate, not you know, because they're eating a big meal, but because they're hoping that there's this possibility of dual fueling, where you can draw from the ketones when you're doing like, you know, activities that would require that energy system more. And then if you have the metabolic flexibility, you'd be able to also with the glucose, or with some sort of like a UCAN super starch is fantastic, because it doesn't increase insulin or glucose. So I think that's my pick.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. People with epilepsy that actually need to be in ketosis to stop them having epileptic fits. Now, there's other things around that you can go into, but I won't. But generally, if they keep their ketones high, their body continues to deal with their issues consistently, and it doesn't pull them out of ketosis after the food's gone. So I find that it keeps their ketones level high enough that it tricks them for the time where they are eating the carbs, that their blood sugar does go up. Yeah, I do think it tricks the system a bit too much, and I don't know the sustainability or if I could recommend doing that, but I do know people that have had epilepsy that do actually do that, and it tricks the system. And then when they don't do it, then that's when they start having issues, especially if they're frequent flyers when it comes to epileptic fits. So yeah, Bet or Bug, yeah, you've got one of the prizes. And Kirsten, if you can let me know the other name and reach out to them for us about the eating and taking exogenous ketones. And Eve, thanks very much for listening in again and mentioning about my tooth. Yes, Dr. Dom is a wizard, an absolute fucking wizard, and you wouldn't know that I'd had major, almost a sinus lift yesterday. So yeah, wow, so thanks. He's the world's leading biological dentist. He truly is amazing. It's, awesome. So anyway, I won't go on about that. Well, it's been really awesome to speak to you today. And then what we'll do is we'll stay on the Zoom call for a minute and just quickly chat and wrap up on over there. But for everyone that's listening on Instagram Live, thanks for listening in.